At Vanderbilt Law School, I've done every kind of advocacy you can name. I ran a grassroots environmental group. I ran a national group on immigration policy. I ran another national organization to help neighborhoods deal with crime issues and downtown business district deal with disorder issues. And then I ended up, after my time doing research on problem-solving lawyering, I ended up working for a peacemaking organization called Search for Common Ground. So I've been an advocate, or I've been a lobbyist, a litigator, a peacemaker, a researcher, and now a professor. I spent the first part of my career running public interest groups that were very conventional advocacy groups. I ran an environmental group, and we sued oil companies, and we lobbied for laws to restrict mining companies, and we tried to stop the highway department from cutting down trees. Back in the 70s, it was a pretty conventional grassroots environmental group. I went from there to starting a national organization on immigration, and we lobbied Congress to pass laws. We organized a grassroots lobbying activity. We filed lawsuits. We wrote reports to advance our point of view. After that, I got involved in yet another organization. This was trying to sort of be deliberately centrist, but we were focused on helping people at the neighborhood level try to deal with crime and disorder problems, especially when you had an inner city group trying to get rid of drug dealers, and you had lawyers saying, no, you can't do that because you're violating someone's rights. So I got involved in, again, it was sort of conventional advocacy in the sense that I would try to find what I thought was right, mobilize forces to overcome the people that were wrong in order that what the right policy would be instituted. That was my modus operandi. And about that time, Jeremy Travis, who's now at the John Jay Institute or University in New York, was the director of the National Institute of Justice. And I had become uncomfortable with the basic strategy of nonprofit advocacy groups at the time, which, if you wanted to summarize it, you'd say name them, blame them, shame them. You would say it was either David and Goliath was one of them, so you'd find somebody who was wrong. You would take a slingshot, like a lawsuit or a bill. You would throw it at them, they would fall down, you would be crowned the victor. The problem was that Goliath kept getting up, and he was really ticked off because he thought rocks were out of bounds. And he would bring a bigger army, and I would have to get a bigger group, and we'd go and fight again over the same issue. My other strategy I could call Moses and Pharaoh, to continue the biblical metaphors. This is the one where you come and say, let my people go. I'm right, you're wrong. Do what I want. And when you don't, I'll impose pain by attacking you, by delegitimizing you, by exposing what a villain you are, by trying to get you to lose your election or your job. And there was a problem with this strategy as well, and that is I couldn't seem to get much above lice. If you know the biblical story of Moses and Pharaoh, first Moses comes and says, do what I want, let my people go. Pharaoh says no, and so Moses brings down from God a plague. And I forget what the first one was, but the second or third was lice, and it gets way up. We get floods, and the water turns to blood, and eventually all the firstborn sons are killed. And that's when Pharaoh finally says, okay, I'll let the people go. I could never impose that much pain. I could make Pharaoh mad, but rarely would Pharaoh do what I wanted. I could win a lawsuit, I could get a bill passed. But oftentimes getting the drug dealers off the corner was more complicated than winning a lawsuit or passing a bill. And I often had the feeling that as an outside national advocacy group, I was kind of using the locals to find a really good example of a national trend that I thought was wrong. And then I would get the local groups to enact this narrative in the form of a local dispute, which I would then publicize around the country and show how right I was and how wrong the other side was. but I became sort of uncertain about whether after I was gone the situation was actually improved. What I counted as a victory, was it really better for everybody there? And about that time, Jeremy Travis came along and said, you know, I'm looking at something different. I think there's something new going on, that some of the organizations are not using a I'm going to win model, but rather I'm going to try to solve the problem model. And I'd run into some of these, and I thought there's something different here. So he and I agreed that I would study them, and he'd give me a fellowship at the National Institute of Justice. So for about a year and a half, I went around like the guy with the lamp, looking for truth. Well, I wasn't looking for truth, but I was looking for a different approach. And what I found was that you had people in prosecutors' offices, public defender offices, in, more surprisingly, legal aid offices, public defender offices, bar association committees, all sorts of legal groups that were doing something different. And so I wrote a big report, 400 pages, for the NIJ. And in it, what I thought I saw was this. What I thought I saw was that these groups were, first of all, the unit of analysis was the problem instead of the case. It was the drug dealers on the corner rather than the prosecution of the individual drug dealer. The second thing that was different was that the definition of success was the amelioration of the symptoms that were associated with the problem, rather than a victory in a case. And the third thing that was different was that the selection of which problem to focus on was determined by the energy and the concerns of people in the community, rather than from some template that was derived from a set of universal principles by the wise prosecutor, judge, or public defender. It was intensely pragmatic. So I wrote this down and I said, let's call it community-oriented lawyering to go with community-oriented policing. Well, it wasn't exactly a bestseller. Perhaps I was ahead of my time. But what I realized when I was finished doing that research was I couldn't go back to doing advocacy in the conventional way. Having seen this different approach, name them, blame them, shame them, was I couldn't do that anymore. So I decided to become a professional peacemaker. So I went to the largest conflict resolution nonprofit in the world called Search for Common Ground, and I said, let's create a U.S. program for Search for Common Ground. And for about 3 years, what I did was find an issue like public funding for faith-based organizations and try to convene consensus groups where you get the leaders of these different organizations to sit down together and look for solutions. There are limits to that tool, but what I think I learned about it was something like the following. Number one, there are a fair number of problems out there where people are not so determined to fight each other that if you could create some sort of setting where they could come together without embarrassing themselves, without taking too much in the way of risk, and sit down together, there are always going to be some problems, some pieces of their dispute that they can work together on. And that once they've done it once, sometimes you build trust and understanding to the point that they can take on a bigger problem. That in every conflict between basic points of view at the local, state, national level, there are always pieces of that if you can cut them off and deal with them separately, can be worked on in a pragmatic way. And it turns out that no one group has got a complete answer. They think they do. When I was an advocate for a nonprofit organization, I had a complete story. If you did it my way, it would definitely be solved.